with that said, Peter and I have known each other since May of 2002, when I was 7 years old and he was already 27. At the embassy, the Austrian embassy in DC, where we were two co-founders of the Austrian Scientists in North America organization that Peter was the president of, consequently, a few years in, and later on, I was as well. That was a side job. He really is an anesthesiologist with a distinguished career both in Austria and then in St. Louis, where he practiced and was on faculty. And then a few years ago, was recruited to be the chief of anesthesiology at the University of Chicago, where he continues to lead and treat, and apparently in his spare time does entrepreneurial pursuits. Being a 20+ year friend puts you in the category of having your arm twisted to help. So Peter and I have also conspired on that subject. So I'm quite aware of his pursuits here. I'm on his advisory board, and so it's a pleasure for me to introduce to you a truly entrepreneurial physician, friend to many, and a leader in his field, not just professionally, but also in many other pursuits. So with that, I'll just kick it over to Peter.
Thank you. And it's really a pleasure. Normally we give a lot of talks at medical conferences, and it's very geared towards the specialist or uber specialist. So I actually really enjoy, because I'm not a very experienced entrepreneur. My experience was shaped and helped actually in the WashU ecosystem in St. Louis. And I'm not sure if this has been or is on your radar, but this has become quite a fun and exciting ecosystem of innovation and entrepreneurship between sort of WashU, St. Louis University, and a few other kind of like players in the St. Louis area. And the individual who was really extraordinarily helpful, his name is Emre Toker. He's one of the co-founders, and Emre is also an immigrant. He's originally from Turkey, and so he actually was the director of the Scandalaria Center at WashU for innovation entrepreneurship. Built this up from scratch, and he himself is a successful entrepreneur. He started and had successful exits 3 times in a row for a medical device company, mostly in the field, I think, of breast cancer imaging. So and now he really is very much invested in teaching and helping kind of the next generations, of innovators and entrepreneurs. So this goes back quite a long time. And for me, and I'm going to show you, kind of a little bit the path. We not dabbled, but we really tried hard in a way to kind of develop kind of a commercial angle to this. It was not easy, and so I'm gonna kind of jump to not to kind of the main thing, but we just in April we formally incorporated the company, and so now we are very early, and I'm going to tell you about the whole path. So because it's Society of Physician Entrepreneurs, there's clearly a lot of medical lingo, and I wasn't sure what the kind of like the how the audience kind of the composition would be. Please interrupt me. We're a small group. If you don't understand anything, it's completely okay. Just to ask you if you didn't understand something. But because I think it is important to understand kind of a little bit also the science, I wanted to start with that. So I'm gonna share now. Can you see that?
Yes.
Everyone?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, cool. So you see, that our company is called Nitro Therapeutics, and in a second you're gonna see why. You know. Okay, so I'm gonna go through this fairly quickly because it's really the interface of kind of the science and then how to commercialize this. So I want to just get everyone on the same page what we're talking about. Okay, I'm gonna talk with the conditions and with the kind of the disease. So let's talk about depression. The technical term, the formal technical term, is major depressive disorder. And it turns out that depression is not the same in every patient. So here is basically the gestalt of a few elements that are often very common in patients with depressions. I'm also not a psychiatrist, but I've been working in this field now for more than 10 years. And you can see that there is, elements of mood, self-esteem, concentration, sleep disturbance. And so a lot of patients with depression have multiple symptoms, with this. So here is, if you go to an MD, to a psychiatrist, to a general practitioner, in order for you to be diagnosed with depression, here are the criteria. It's called DSM-5. And so you basically need to meet 5 out of those 9 in order for you to be basically diagnosed with depression. And persistent depressive disorder is really if a patient has depression and suffers from depression for more than a year. So at any given time, about 5% of the adult population is affected by depression. And again, it doesn't mean that they all, many of them may actually be well treated and adequately treated. But if you think about the raw numbers, right, there are about 200 million adults in the United States, so 5% is a huge number. Lifetime prevalence, this means, about 70% of all adults will have a major depressive episode once in their lifetime. And so until I would say maybe 10, 15 years ago or so, the standard treatment, SSRIs or SNRIs, so this is selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, were the standard or still are the standard treatment. And the issue with those treatments is twofold. It takes really a month for them to become fully effective. And it turns out that maybe only it's effective in 2 out of 3. Now, in the grand scheme, that's actually a huge success. So depression is treatable in the majority of patients and it works fine. But then you see a lot of patients who are on Prozac or some other antidepressants for a long time. But there was nothing or very little you can do to immediately help a patient. So, and here's kind of the condition that we are focused on. It's called treatment-resistant depression. What is this? It's basically patients who don't respond to the treatment I just described. So it turns out that 1 in 3, maybe 1 in 4 adults do not respond to the standard treatment. And then psychiatrists and, general practitioners would prescribe different, classes of drugs, different atypical antipsychotics, whatnot. And so there are patients that we have actually trying to treat who have failed more than 10, 15 different drugs, and nothing works for these patients. So these are, if you have, there are about 5 million adults in the US that are affected by treatment-resistant depression. And if you have seen any of these patients, you have seen that this is a really serious disease. They barely leave the house, they're barely functional, they have a high suicide risk, and often they're disabled. They can no longer function. And what is terrible for them is that there was really no adequate treatment. So there's not a formal definition, but a soft definition that a lot of psychiatry will use is that patients must have failed 2 what's called adequate dose duration treatments with 2 different antidepressants. And if they have failed both, then they are considered treatment-resistant depressive. So until about 10 years ago, what has helped these patients? ECT. So this is electroshock therapy. It sounds horrible. It is not. You get an anesthetic, and then the seizure is induced by a brief pulse of electricity to the brain, and this really helps patients. And so patients often request this because it helps them immediately. And the next point is something, if you have not heard of this, you should be aware. So it's ketamine, or intranasal S-ketamine, which is an enantiomer. It's called Spravato. The discovery that ketamine, which is also an anesthetic, helps patients with treatment-resistant depression, is considered the biggest breakthrough in depression research in the last 50 years. And, science and nature have really sort of basically applauded the investigators for discovering this. And a very novel approach is vagal nerve stimulator or transmagnetic. So that's more interventional stuff that seems to be also helping patients. There is now also a development for psychedelics. This is, of course, very a hot field. I'm not going to talk too much about this. It remains to be seen how which drugs will really be helpful for these patients and which are not. There's a lot of hype right now, and a lot of money thrown at these companies. So again, ketamine breakthrough. Ketamine was discovered in the 70s. And is a bit an unusual anesthetic. And it turns out that, as I mentioned, ketamine can help patients often within hours. It is also helping patients with TRD. So now let's briefly just talk about nitrous oxide, because this is a drug that we are kind of developing. It's the oldest drug that we currently use. It's very simple, N2O. So discovered by Priestley, this was around the 1740s, 1750s. And so this was the first era of chemistry. So they synthesized a few kind of fairly simple molecules and then tried them out, and it was laughing gas. But one important caveat is, and there are a lot of college students still in England and here trying nitrous, and you can buy this, over the interwebs. The party use is 100% nitrous. You inhale basically pure nitrous, no oxygen. And so a lot of the effects that are attributed to nitrous may actually be due to lack of oxygen and on top of this nitrous. So this was the first discovery. And then it's been basically used about since 1850, the discovery kind of anesthesia. So here's some basic facts. It's colorless, odorless. One thing that is really interesting, it's produced in large quantities by soil bacteria. So it's a greenhouse gas. This is kind of like their consideration. It's not a controlled substance, and it's in whipped cream. So a lot of teenagers get their first high with inhaling, whippets. And you can buy this sort of, over the internet. So where do we use nitrous clinically? It is actually the weakest drug known to man that we currently use. We use it as an adjunct during anesthesia. Many of you may have gotten it, or during a visit at the dentist, and here that through the nasal mask. It's wonderful for analgesia, so for pain control, for sedation. You get slightly kind of sleepy. It's used more and more during pain control during childbirth. You basically get a mask and inhale it. And because you don't require any technology to deliver it, it's basically, you need an oxygen tank and a nitrous tank. It is on the list of the WHO list of essential drugs because it can be used anywhere. Sub-Saharan Africa, in the remotest areas, you have something, a tool at your hand where it can really help patients. Who otherwise, would have no, wouldn't have any treatment. So just some basic pharmacology just to understand why this is different. It has a super fast onset. It gets, within a few minutes. A super fast offset, so rapid elimination. It's not metabolized, so the drug is inhaled and exhaled. That's it, and there's no tissue storage. So in a lot of ways, this is really an ideal drug because there's no metabolites. So what was our idea? And I'm going to sort of, get to the chase. It's based on when I heard about the ketamine breakthrough. And I did some, what's called molecular pharmacology back, in the early 2000s. And I did work on nitrous on the molecular mechanism. I was very interested in this. And then I heard about the ketamine breakthrough. And so this was a very simple reason. I heard that ketamine which is an NMDA receptor antagonist, is effective for treatment-resistant depression. Let's not talk too much about sort of the molecular pharmacology. Yeah, NMDA receptors are a very kind of common receptor type in the central nervous system. It's a glutamate receptor. And I knew from our experiments that nitrous also is an NMDA receptor antagonist. So it's like, well, if ketamine is this and is helpful for TRD, then nitrous should also kind of maybe be an effective drug. And so we just did the first patient trial. So this was not in with any kind of like commercial end goal in mind. It was really to see if it works. So we did the first, human patient trial, and we gave a nitrous and oxygen mix. We used a dental anesthesia apparatus with a face mask. We gave 50% because we figured, in dentistry, you use 75% or, the rest is oxygen. Because we figured if 50% doesn't work, then probably 75% would also not work. We gave it for an hour. And so, basically, patient got the mask and inhaled this mix. And the rest is basically just, the sort of some of the details. And because it's very quick acting, the patients typically recover within 5 to 10 minutes and are completely back to normal. And so you may ask, oh, it's laughing gas and or a patient laugh and get high. The answer is no, they don't. They may have a few kind of what we call psychotomimetic side effects, a little bit hallucinations or so, but it's mild. And the typical response is that they get sleepy. That's it. So that's the only thing you would see. But I want to just as physician scientists, we're trained skeptics, right? So we don't believe in miracles. You want to have facts and evidence. And one thing that was really beautiful in a way when we did the first experiments at WashU, we had a complete separation of the treatment team and the team who assessed the patients. We did not know how the patients did, and the assessment team did not know what their assigned treatment was. But it became apparent that some patients who were depressed for months and years suddenly became so much better. And so my scientific partner, Chuck Conway, who is the head of the depression clinic there, is like, I've never seen this patient in like 10 years so kind of not depressed as I've seen this. So it was like, well, there's something there. So we continued, and so this is really a synopsis of the clinical trials evidence. So we have now completed 3 trials, and none of these trials were basically done with the idea to get FDA approval, but done in a very rigorous fashion. And we basically used 50% in one trial, we used 25% and 50% in another, and we compared these treatments. And here's basically, so from, we had a publication in Science Translation Medicine about 2 years ago, and this basically compares the response. One thing is interesting that in depression studies, you will always see a placebo effect. So here, for instance, if you see that, this is placebo and this is kind of 25 and 50, but there's no difference. And there's one mind-boggling effect here. I'm gonna tell you. So of course, placebo. So here on the y-axis, just for explanation, this is a severity scale for depression. Anything above like 20 points, or I think 19 or 20 points, is a very severe depression. Anything below 7 points, you're not depressed. So a reduction by like 7 or 8 points is really meaningful for patients, like really. So I told you, we give this for 1 hour, right? 1 hour inhalation. And now see this, how long this, the effects last. In some patients, these effects lasted for a month. So they were treated, came out of the depression, and stayed non-depressed for a month. And this is completely mind-boggling, because normally in a lot of drugs that we give, like a drug against high blood pressure, you give the drug, the blood pressure drops. The drug is eliminated from the body, the blood pressure goes back up. It doesn't stay low, but so here in this case, so there's something called neuroplasticity that's why the brain is the most complicated organ by a lot. So something changes in the brain, and it like flips the switch, and then stay in some patients who are responding, it stays like this for a long time. This is also has been observed in ketamine. So that's kind of a synopsis of our clinical evidence. So here we are, right? We've done 2-3 clinical trials. We clearly see there's an unmet need. We have a treatment that could potentially really help a lot of patients. It is dirt cheap. You know, nitrous is very cheap, available worldwide, and it may really help patients, you know, with that severe form of depression. So what is, you know, and so what are our options, right, to get this treatment to patients? As I said, you know, I was not a kind of like ready to jump and leave academia to kind of pursue this, because there's really a lot of stuff I still want to kind of answer. But how do we do this, right? So 3 options. Option 1, let's continue our academic research, ignore kind of this question, and let others figure out. Actually, a lot of like academic groups do this, right? So they continue on this path. But you know, for us, it was like, man, there's really something there. If we ignore that kind of the potential, we may really deprive patients of help. So the option 2 would be, because it's an approved drug, to promote off-label use. MDs in the United States and Europe are allowed to use drugs off-label. So we could have done this, but this has actually gotten a very sour note also among psychiatry. You probably, there are ketamine clinics in Dallas, ketamine clinics in Chicago, ketamine clinics everywhere. And they help patients, but they're also built by, let's say, very entrepreneurial MDs who see the dollars before, you know, necessarily they are motivated by only the right things. So it was clear that the psychiatry community wanted to, both with ketamine and, for instance, with nitrous, in order for it to get accepted, it needs to be done the right way. And the only right way is to get FDA approval. So then we said, you know, we've got to form a company and do all the necessary steps to get FDA approval. So here we go. This is Nitro Therapeutics. You know, this is a design that's from the 70s. I'm kidding. And our goal is really going after treatment-resistant depression. So just to now talk a little bit about the market, is, you know, I really try to mix and match sort of the medical and the scientific with kind of the business side. In terms of the numbers, there are about 20 million adults in the US who currently are diagnosed with depression, who are getting treated for depression. As I mentioned, about 5 million have treatment-resistant depression, and we know from interviews, you know, we were part of the ICLO program here from the, you know, NSF kind of supported. We did interviews with, you know, with stakeholders, psychiatrists, whatnot, that at a minimum 2% would be willing to self-pay. And that's also been seen in the ketamine communities. So here, let's talk about really about the unique situation. I think, you know, every startup company, every, you know, commercialization plan, every project in this regard has different opportunities and challenges. I think some are quite unique for us. And so on the left, you see the opportunities. On the right, you see the challenges. So on the one, it's clearly there's a huge market. You know, it's a significant disease burden. It's in the top 10 disease burden worldwide. So you don't have to convince anyone that depression, treatment-resistant depression, suicidality is an important area. We also, I didn't mention this, have evidence from a very small kind of set that it may help PTSD. We did a very small pilot study in US veterans. So that's also dear to my heart. So there is real potential in several kind of mental health conditions. We have very strong trial results, very promising. Again, not on the auspices of the FDA, but very rigorously done. We have significant expertise. I want to say we are the world's expert in kind of in this field. And nitrous is also a drug that's truly among it's older than aspirin, right? So it's the oldest drug that we still use. and it's currently used millions of times every single day, right? So we know this drug by and large. Now, the challenge is nitrous oxide is produced by bacteria. It's a naturally occurring product, so there's no way you can patent this. Also, it's such a simple molecule, you cannot just add a third nitrogen and make it N3O or do something funky about the chemistry. It is nitrous, it's N2O, and there's no enantiomer or whatnot, so you cannot patent this as a new chemical entity. Because it's been around so long, there's been a lot of trials and tribulations about nitrous using for this and trying for this. And so this was an uphill battle about the prior art. It seems like we have a path now, but it's, in terms of laughing gas should be helping for depression, right? So it is clearly was an uphill battle to convince patent office that this may not be the case. So how do we protect the invention if it's currently used, in dentistry and whatnot? As a side note, dentists are not allowed to treat mental health disorders, right? That's MD only. And so, that's a bit more theoretical than practical, because they would violate a lot of laws. So our goal or our question was, should we just go for a drug approval or a drug device combo? As you can see, we choose the latter, or like a parallel path. What is the FDA strategy going to be? And then, in terms of the challenge, it is clear that if you do a proper, what's called a pivotal phase 2 and 3 trials, we're talking about several hundred of patients, maybe 2 trials. And normally in a large clinical trial, you typically would expect the cost per patient, even for a somewhat simple study, be $10,000, $20,000 per patient. This is industry kind of like, standard sort of. So if you multiply this, we're quickly in the tens of millions of dollars, that is required for FDA approval. So it's not something you can bootstrap. It's, so our solution, what we're going to do was that we have decided to develop a gas device combo. We will in parallel go for approval of both the drug and the device. Our goal is to basically give psychiatrists and MDs, clinics who treat patients with depression, treatment-resistant depression, a device that can, a very sort of very easy to use device that they can then start treating these patients. And the one thing that may not be clear to you, and this is an indirect benefit of kind of our company or of the product. Psychiatrists they're among the lowest paid physician class anywhere. They don't have any intervention, right? And so they basically often bill by time, and so if they have an intervention where they can actually treat these patients, it can have a substantial impact, positive impact on their practice revenue. And this is, we know for a fact this is true for dentists. They can increase, I think, the office revenue by giving nitrous by maybe close to 20 to 25%. So this is significant for a medical practice. I think the data are there to believe that for psychiatrists it may be much, much better. Hold on. So now the competition. I want to just give you what is out there. What did we learn and what did we see? So ECT is currently still used. Most medical centers provide ECT, and it turns out if you look at Medicare and national data, the cost per year for patients with ECT is close to between $15,000 to $20,000. Because you need to give this either monthly, or if the patient is in acute crisis in a series of treatments, you have to get anesthesia. So it's a very expensive proposition, and sometimes the costs are more higher. The second is the off-label ketamine use. So in the ketamine clinics, you get an IV, and then you get a ketamine infusion. So this is often not reimbursed by any payer. So patients pay this themselves because it helps them. And they're willing to pay anywhere between $500,000 per treatment. So we know this. If you extrapolate this once a month, you're already in between the maybe $5,000 to $10,000 out-of-pocket pay. And just 2 years ago, this was, I think, a very difficult development from a commercialization standpoint. And the S-enantiomer of ketamine, S-ketamine, has been approved by the FDA in a complicated sort of fashion. It's given intranasal as a spray, has been approved for treatment-resistant depression. So it has a lot of side effects. As a list of few, I'm not going to go through all of those. It has a lot of side effects that are absent in nitrous. But this was the only new drug that was approved by the FDA for treatment-resistant depression. So here's a matrix showing you comparison between costs, can be given in MD office, access for patients, serious side effects, and then listing ECT, ketamine, Spravato, and nitrous oxide. In many of them, nitrous would fare much better, clearly in terms of side effects, and also in terms of cost. Now, a business model, as you can understand, with a very new and very early company, I cannot go too deep because a lot of the stuff is still, kind of confidential. When we looked at market data, this does not come as a surprise to you. It's not just for approved drugs, the antidepressant market is growing so rapidly, but also in terms of big pharma, there's a huge amount of investment in developing psychedelics and novel treatments for mental health disorders. So it's a huge growth market. In terms of primary market, we estimate that there are about 10,000 individual physicians, group practices, or that see patients with depression or treatment-resistant depression. Then there are about 5,000 hospitals, about 5,000 freestanding urgent care or clinics, so another 10,000. So at a maximum, we're talking about 20,000 entities or practices that you could sell a product to. And so as part of the ICO program, this was something that I didn't realize, but the importance of really running that idea and the proposal by potential customers, and it validated a lot of our assumptions that a lot of psychiatrists were very excited and would basically integrate nitrous into their group practice. And I think this was actually a really important piece of feedback and information. And I am at the end. So sorry, this sounded a little bit like an abrupt ending. This is Dallas in summer. I'm kidding. You wish, right? A lot of snow. I hope that I could give you, and I'm happy to answer now your questions, both kind of a mix of science and why we, doing this, and a little bit sort of the business. Okay, so questions?
Yeah, thank you, Peter. That was excellent. I think that's a view from your house, if I'm not mistaken. The picture. So I've been there in Chicago. So nice sunsets in Chicago as well. Yeah, we can take any questions. Obviously, this can go a million different directions. Pablo, do you have questions?
Yes, thank you for the presentation. Very interesting nitric oxygen. Nitric oxide, I think, is a great molecule, and there is a lot of different application it has. Even from my startup perspective, is in lung cancer screening. Nitric oxide is actually a really interesting molecule.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't want to interrupt, but it's not nitric. It's nitrous. Nitric oxide.
Yeah, nitrous. Yeah.
There's really two different molecules in biologically very different functions. So
yeah, one is NO and the other is N2O. Yes. Sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah, but my question is, this device that you are going to develop to analyze, this will be at the doctor's office. Will patient be able to have them in their houses? Because one of the things of current antidepressant therapy is that you have this therapy and you have these pills that can last on the blood for several hours, and you can have the dose. You maintain the dose like for all the time, basically. So how do you deal with that with this type of device?
So right now, it is definitely a development, or it is an option that we potentially consider later. But because nitrous is abused, so it's not an addictive drug, but it's abused. We don't, and I'll be honest, I don't feel comfortable putting this directly into patients' hands yet, unless we have safeguards. Because you can imagine, so if you follow the news in England, nitrous is being banned from kind of, or a lot of safeguards because it's so abused in a lot of young kids. So giving it basically in an uncontrolled fashion, an inhaler or something like this would basically place it into a lot of households where it might be abused, right? And so, no, it is, think about this more as an office, think about this as a sedation nitrous delivery system that is in a psychiatrist's office. And this needs to be done under MD supervision. You know, in a lot of hospitals, MDs are not required to give it. For instance, midwives are allowed to give nitrous, pain control during labor and delivery, but it needs to be someone with the medical background, right? With the license and certification. So that's what we envision. Could this ultimately be developed into a patient device? The answer is yes, but it's not an immediate.
Something like a inhalator. I was thinking like same that you use for asthma, like.
Well, that's a potential, but for us, the answer is no, not right now. It is, think of a much more like a scuba apparatus, and a kind of a much bigger apparatus. It is not, this would not be handled. The question is also, can you compress nitrous so that you can have at least half an hour of an inhalation? You would probably need a serious tank. So there may be technical difficulties how to develop a handheld device. So this is not right now our strategy.
I have a question, if you don't mind if I jump in. So we're also interested in using a different gas, but for a medical device. And I would be interested to hear about what you've learned about, because you'll be distributing this gas, right, to a bunch of different locations. I don't know what you learned and if you could talk about that.
Yes. So you mean talking about kind of the logistics sort of?
Yeah, any logistics or any regulatory things that have come up to your attention?
Yes. So in terms of there are two different aspects. We want to develop this as a drug, right? Get drug approval, not just as a medical gas, but really get drug approval. So we need to go the more complicated, excuse me, path, for regulatory approval. And the fact that it's a medical gas is less important than, it needs to basically get a regulatory drug approval. Now, the other thing is we are actually in early talks with large medical gas companies, which, produce, nitrous, so that we can work together. It would be, I think, for a small startup or any kind of unless you want to go after become a medical gas company, doing this yourself is prohibitively expensive. And then the question is why, right? Why would you build $100 million chemical plant, right, to make nitrous or another gas when this already exists, right? So this is not part of the strategy. So we need a partner, that we can work together, and they have the distribution network, right? So that's the idea, that we maybe have a contract, then contract manufacturer or contract be a vendor basically. And so there can be, of course, preferred vendorship or not. Hubert knows the story much more intimately, of course, also. This has been very tedious with them. It was not, they were not, they expressed a lot of interest, a lot of big words, but when it came to actually anything actionable, there was very little. So I think things may change soon, I hope, because we just basically got an outline of a potential FDA strategy. So we are setting up a kind of a follow-up meeting where we really probably decide on how we want to approach the FDA strategy. And I think with this in hand, there will be more concrete, I would say, follow-up from the medical gas company. But it's been frustrating, very frustrating.
Okay. Do we need any other questions? I know the problem is a big one you're tackling, and of course the most complicated question has simply been this: well, how can we bring this safely to patients, and how can we pick a pathway that can create a safe treatment option for patients, and how can we do this in a way that justifies the expense? And so the I-Core program that Peter is referring to, I think some of you have participated in as well. You did that at St. Louis, did you?
Here in Chicago. Here in Chicago, last summer.
So I think one of the most important outcomes is that you are being forced more or less to address especially your market size and your potential customers.
Customer discovery, yes.
And it's usually sets you up for a really nice SBIR application, because the type of information that you're filling in is often the type of information that you can use for an SBIR.
Yep.
So I forget if have you already submitted one, or are you looking to submit an SBIR?
I think we decided in January. I think it's the next deadline because we needed the regulatory path so that to understand kind of what, and probably a pre-IND meeting with the FDA. So this is something that is also new to me, right, and is not something that I've experienced. So that's something we're navigating, but we have several very experienced advisors and co-founders. So
yeah,
that's maybe the next step.
Good. Well, I mean, technically we have all the way till 7 p.m., but we're willing and able to take a couple more questions. If not, we're gonna release everyone. So I don't know if we wouldn't be able to have you here had it been in person. So Peter, we do these alternating between on Zoom and in person. So
I'll fly out.
The advantage is that we can get you on fairly short notice. The disadvantage is we don't.
Absolutely.
I
appreciate it. Really, I really do.
Good. Well, I think if I don't see anyone unmuting themselves, then I'm just going to let everyone have a great evening. Peter, thank you again for being here and sharing your story. The group, Society of Physician Entrepreneurs, is much larger than just the Dallas chapter. And honestly, I don't know, but I suspect there is a Chicago chapter. Not sure, but something I hadn't thought about. I should have brought that up. I can look it up because since I'm the leader here, I'm on the Slack that has all the groups. I think it'd be a good group for you to meet in Chicago as well, and overall a good platform as well for you.
Agreed.
So with that, thanks everyone. Thank you, Peter, and we'll see you again at the next SOPE. And there's Christoph, who's still slaving away at my office over here.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.